Hello everyone, this is In-Game Arts with another box and another offline product game review. This is Silent Hill 2 Remake for the PlayStation 5. To jump right into it, this physical copy here is just a base vanilla version of the game, so the on-disc version is 1.0. Now sadly there was an update available. This update size was 7 gigabytes big and will take you to version 1.5.0 since the time making this video. Now like always, I play all my games completely offline with an unregistered account, and I didn't experience any massive game breaking bugs or issues, and as well I was still unlocking trophies with my unregistered account. Now I didn't experience anything that prevented me from progressing, but I did have some little minor hiccups and I do have some minor nitpicks and complaints about certain design aspects. But overall, Silent Hill 2 was a fully functional working game straight off the disc, which was extremely nice to see with no real noteworthy issues. But for the most part, my experience was flawless, and I'm relatively happy with the overall experience. Now sadly there is a bit of missing content from the game when it first released on PlayStation 2, and that was the bonus little chapter DLC kind of content where you get to play as Mira's special little chapter. I'm expecting they're going to probably sell that as DLC down the road, kind of like Resident Evil 4 Remake, what they did with Ada's campaign. They just sell it later. I expected it, so just keep that in mind that there is a slight downgrade from the PlayStation 2 in that area. But overall, they really basically cranked the game to 11, an overall full experience of Silent Hill 2. The game is packed with the original content as well as more content, as well as that the new over-the-shoulder camera does work really well with the experience, and the overall captured the essence of Silent Hill 2 almost to a T. There are maybe a few moments throughout the game that maybe the original did do it better, but for surprisingly they recaptured the full experience as well as added to that experience tenfold to the original experience, which I am super glad that Blooper Team really did with Silent Hill 2. Now, I do want to put the cards on the table and claim that I am not the biggest fan of Silent Hill. It's not like my most favorite survival horror franchise, and I've never personally found Silent Hill games to be scary, but I've always found them to be thought-provoking, or as I like to sometimes call, the rabbit hole formula, where when you start getting invested into it, you just can't pull yourself away. You just constantly want to see where it's going to go or what's happening throughout the game. It's not necessarily scary, but it sinks into you so much that you really want to know what's going on. And I can see a lot of people from the previous first releases, whether you don't like tank controls or fixed camera angles, or just the overall experience wasn't to your taste, which is fully understandable. So I do recommend, if you probably didn't like the original first release games, I do recommend jumping into the second here, the remake, because it is very modernized and overall experience. But I do recommend, if you did play this version here of Silent Hill 2 Remake and you've yet to play the original, I actually still highly recommend the originals as well, because while this game does add to the experience and add some newer content, as well as that keeps the original content slightly to the original, there are some aspects that the original may surprise you in terms of giving you an all-new experience. So if you're now a new fan of Silent Hill or just a big fan of Silent Hill 2, I do still recommend going back to the original, and I do hope that we can maybe get an HD remaster of the original games at some point from Konami. But I do want this video not to be too long, so I'm going to start going into my problems with the game. First most, FPS problems. This game is littered with choppy frame rate. 1 minute the game will run perfectly smooth at 60 frames per second on performance mode, but once you go into this town, the Silent Hills town area, or lots of enemies or a lot of actions going on, that frame rate can tank severely. It didn't really affect me that much, but especially when I went to like quality mode, because I was thinking, well, maybe in performance mode it's stuttery. Maybe if I go into quality mode, it'll be a steady, smooth 30 frames per second. Yeah, no. Don't even try touching quality mode, because boy, that frame rate tanks, and I couldn't believe that was even an option because of how much the frame rate tanked in quality mode. So I do not even recommend playing the game in quality mode. Play in performance mode, and just be prepared for that frame rate to be bouncing around quite significantly at certain moments in the game. That is probably the glaring flaw. If you're someone who is very picky about frame rate, bear with the fact you're going to have some choppy frame rate at certain moments, as well as there is some micro stutters here and there, like when it's loading up level or loading up content, or if the run around Silent Hill, there's a lot going on as processing and loading up, so there can be some pretty micro stutters and like a little choppiness here and there. Moving on, there were times when like looking at something or picking up an item or something like that, it can be very finicky to get the reticle right at the point to be able to activate the pickup or look at something. Sometimes this was surprisingly picky, and just because you even though you think you're looking right at it, it's not registering it. You have to move your camera at a weird angle sometimes. And just that is the really annoyance, but it's not the big deal. Once you get the hang to expect it, you kind of get used to where you need to put your camera. But at the beginning, you're going to probably be really weirded out that where they want you to put your camera to look at something or to pick something up. As well as that there was a few times when I was trying to unlock a door. This mostly involved like if a door was locked and the only way I could unlock it was from behind it, and you had to pull this lever. James would not walk into the right position to unlock the door. Now, thankfully, I can't think of any of these being crucially important to the game, but there was just a few times that every time I tried to press the X button, he would not move into position correctly to reach up and move the latch. But eventually I did get them to work. I got them all to work. And you just got to fiddle with it, try to move James in the right position, keep spamming X to try to move your body in the right area so he can register to reach for the latch. That was a few times, and that was a little annoying, but it wasn't like overwhelmingly frustrating. As well as that during certain moments of the game, the voice acting is really, really good and it's really clear. But there are other times like you're in the middle of the game and sometimes James or another character, I get that they're probably trying to whisper because they're trying not to be loud, but there's a few times I could barely hear what they're saying. If I didn't have subtitles on, I wouldn't even realize there was somebody talking. So, because that's how low the volume is at certain moments. But you might want to turn up the voice volume, but there are other moments during like a cutscene or certain interactions where the voice volume is just fine. So you don't want to crank it up. So there's a little inconsistency with the volume of voice acting volume. So just bear with that in mind. Now, this one's a personal nitpick, and sadly they do have a fix for this, but it's only available if you've updated the game, and that is when James is wounded. The game will put this little red ring all around James's health, and it is very distracting. I do not know what possessed them to do it that way to indicate that when James is wounded, because the first indicator is like red all around the screen, and it looks like you're severely wounded, and really you're only like at minor caution, and that's about it. It was really frustrating. I wish they could have done a different way to indicate James' health. All you had to really do is probably put a little cross indicator at the bottom right corner, and it occasionally maybe could flash orange or yellow or red to let you know how wounded James was. Then putting this thick red around the corner of the screens. It's very ugly and it's very distracting. And I constantly healed just because I knew that I wasn't really that damaged, but I just hated seeing that little red life health bar all around the screen. Now, like I said, the game does have an update that you need to download if you want to remove that like health indicator, but on disc, that feature is not available, so that's very disappointing. Next up, we have, I won't hit an enemy on the ground. There's a few times I hit an enemy and he fell down to the ground, and I know he was not probably dead, or maybe need to hit him a few more times to make sure he stayed dead. But James kept acting like the enemy is standing up. So I kept swinging, but he kept swinging in the air and not hitting the ground. This happened to quite a few times. It wasn't that big of a deal, but it was frustrating when I know the enemy was not fully dead and I wanted to hit them on the ground, but James would not hit them. As well as that, there was 2 times I did get stuck. One time was in the prison, and the second time was in the hotel. The prison one was brought by a bed where James, when he hits enemies on the ground, he'll like move into an animation to hit people on the ground, and that kind of moved me and jammed me into a bed, and I couldn't get out of the bed. I was just running in place, so the only way I could get out of it was to reload my save. The second time was in the hotel. I got hit and I got moved up on top of like some counter shelf area, and James couldn't move and I got stuck. Thankfully, the enemy like did a jump attack and knocked me out of it, and now the enemy was stuck in that same corner that I was stuck in. So just be very mindful. There are certain aspects and certain what's the word, like objects around that you could get yourself wedged into or get stuck to, and it could prevent you progressing. You may have to reload your save. But as I always advise, make multiple saves. Like make as many as you feel comfortable with. So that way you can have an extra save to reload up in case there's any issues like that. As well as that, this is not a bug, but it can be frustrating maybe for some people. I only died 2 times throughout my first playthrough of the entire game, and that's not because of like challenge or anything like that. It was because I got stuck. And this is not a different stuck when I talked about earlier about getting stuck on an object. Enemies are not movable. You can only move them if you like attack them or hit them in some way. You can't like push them or dodge through them or anything like that. So if you get trapped into a corner and there's like maybe sometimes it's just one enemy right in the corner of a room or something like that, you're trapped there. So if you're don't do anything to knock that enemy out of the way, they'll just keep wailing on you and you cannot get away. So just keep that in mind. Those are the only 2 times I died because I got trapped in a corner, and every time I tried to swing or attack or try to heal, they would just do another attack and interrupt my animation. So that was maybe a little frustrating that you can't push like the dodge button to push the enemy out of the way to get through. They probably didn't do this that way. People didn't spam through the game, try to just dodge through all the enemies to make them at least more threatening, but that's very dangerous, so just keep that in mind. Try to avoid corners if you're being surrounded by enemies or if you're wounded or anything like that. And that's about it about my experience throughout the game. Nothing really else happened. Like I said, I never had the game freeze up. I never had the game crash. I never had a soft lock. The only times I had any issues is like when I got stuck on geometry or the frame rate drops. Nothing really truly that interrupted the flow of the game, which I'm really happy and glad to see. The game is a very polished and well-functional game. Now, granted, like I always say, bugs can be fickle. Just because I didn't experience any massive game-breaking bugs or soft locks or anything like that doesn't mean I can't guarantee that you won't experience it. As I've always said, bugs can be fickle. One person could go through the entire game and not experience a single bug, while another person could go through the entire game and do all the same stuff and experience every bug the game has to offer. There's just no way to really describe the situation. So I can just explain what my experience was, and overall, on disc, Silent Hill 2 Remake is a fully functional and working physical copy, which is I'm extremely happy, and I'm glad that Bloober Team nailed it out of the park and not only doing a remake, but actually releasing a done functional physical copy. And that is a rarity nowadays in the AAA industry, so that's really huge praise to Bloober Team. But I mean, overall, the gameplay-wise, I'm going to keep the video very short in terms of the content you're going to be seeing in screen, so I'm going to try to avoid spoilers. I'm not going to really talk about too much in story. I will mention that the combat is massively improved. The melee combat was really satisfying once you get the hang of it. It felt good, it hit good, and it just felt really satisfying. I'm really glad what they did. The only things I could probably complain about is that personally, for me, I did feel the atmosphere was a bit weaker compared to the original, especially the Nightmare Realm. The Nightmare Realm usually had a really hard thumping autotune on the background, and it's just really different from the real world. And that was its juxtaposition, that the real world is all subtle and quiet and eerie, but when you go to the Nightmare Realm, you had this hard banging metal and sound effects in the background that just it accelerated your adrenaline, that making you know that this is not a safe place. And they didn't really do that as much in the remake here. And I can see some people maybe having some complaints with that. Or maybe they just decided not to do that because of the stress levels and people panicking and the constant sound of the music in the background, especially if you're trying to solve a puzzle or something like that. I can see both sides of why they did what they did, but I can see why some people wouldn't be too happy what they changed. In the end, this is a phenomenal remake. I'm just surprised that not only did they recapture the original essence, but they added to it. This isn't like Resident Evil, where Capcom, when they release a remake, they cut content out of it. Or like Square Enix, they completely changed the story with Final Fantasy VII. So to me, it is phenomenal what Bloober Team did here, where they took what was originally beloved and added to it without altering too much of what the essence was. And I think that's highly worth praise. I don't know what else I can really say without going into spoilers or issues or anything like that. My only thing is that I'm interested to see if they do another one, and I would really like to see a remaster of the original games just be available for people to play. I mean, I don't really have anything to say. The only thing I thought was really fascinating was that they clearly talked to somebody about psychology and stuff like that, as that's something I have researched personally and stuff like that, and my own personal problems in life that I'm aware of, and that is James's long stares. I love his look, his way he processes stuff, and he sits there and thinks. I really praised him for that long stare. If anybody knows my psychology and stuff like that, or the distant stare, I mean, it is a very subtle thing, and I greatly love what they did with James with the long stare. The only other little issue I could probably point out is facial animations at certain moments. I don't really think anyone's unattractive or ugly or anything like that. I just think that certain animations can be a little awkward, especially when they're doing some really extreme emotional activities with their faces. It can look a little awkward at the moment, but maybe that is a purpose design because they're trying to go with some uncanny valley feel. But to me, it just felt a little odd at times. But overall, I think what they did here was really good. And I think this is really worth to be on your shelf. And I mean, I'm very interested to rerun through this game again. Actually, I've played all the Silent Hills, or at least the most majority of the mass released ones, and I've never really had a desire to rerun through the games again. And this is probably the first time I've ever wanted to see the other endings. And me going out of my way to get them, not going on YouTube and watching them, but me going out of my way to find these other endings. Now, I do want to point out, I'm still not a fan of running around Silent Hill. That's still my least favorite part of the game, is the big open world Silent Hill part. That's still unfun to me. But once you get past that point, and you get actually the better parts of the game, like getting into the apartments, the hospital, the hotel, the prison, and stuff like that, that's when the game really shines. The Silent Hill running through the town, not a big fan of that, but I've never liked that in the originals either. So, in the end, I feel like I'm just babbling now, and I just feel like it's going to be way too long, but yes, this is a great physical copy. They did an amazing job, and it's well worth to check out. Maybe have a little hiccups here and there, and that's okay. I'm willing to forgive it, because what is here is good, and it was a phenomenal experience, and I could definitely see myself coming back to it. A little under 20 hours to beat the game, and that's with me at least somewhat knowing what's going on with in terms of the pacing, because I have played the original games, so maybe you might have a little bit longer experience, but I am a slower gamer. I like to take my time and stuff like that. So, in the end, I will try to leave links down in the description. If you're instant copy, highly recommend it, and I'll see you guys in the next unboxing video. Bye-bye!